All right. I'm not muted. Good. All right, let's get started. We're going to be going over HIPAA today, HIPAA compliance. A couple things about HIPAA we need to get out of the way. The first thing is that what is HIPAA compliant data? Is your name and your phone number HIPAA data? Is your social security HIPAA data? Is your height and your weight HIPAA data? What is it? So we got to get that taken care of so we know what we're dealing with. Well, HIPAA data is any information that comes from a medical procedure. I'll give you some examples. An X-ray, that's HIPAA data. Your disease, whatever it is, or your ailment or your affliction, that's HIPAA data. Um, if you if you have mental issues, what kind of what kind of diagnosis you have, what kind of medicine you're taking, those are HIPAA data. Your name, your phone number, your social security, that's not HIPAA data. So you don't treat it as such. And so HIPAA data, how long do you have to keep it for? Um, which is retain the records in some sort of format. And the answer is 6 years. So you have to keep HIPAA data, those medical pieces of medical information, for a minimum of 6 years. And then there's also where do you keep it? And you have to keep it in a HIPAA approved storage container. So there are all different kinds of HIPAA approved storage, cloud-based, physical, and digital. So you're going to want to keep your HIPAA data stored in a secure location, and usually you'll keep it encrypted. There are devices that attach to different pieces of equipment inside of the environment, like for instance, like for an X-ray machine, where you have to store the data in a HIPAA compliant container once the X-ray is done. So there are a lot of rules about how to store it and what to store. But again, any information derived from a medical procedure is HIPAA data, and you need to store it in somewhere in a HIPAA approved location or container, and you also need to keep it for 6 years. So we're going to use Lionfish's platform here to keep track of and maintain compliance, and you'll hear compliance management and compliance as a term in our industry, in the IT industry, in the world. What does it mean? What does compliance mean? It means that you meet the controls. These different things here with these numbers on them are called controls. So controls are different rules that you have to follow. Um, in some scenarios, there are strict rules as to what you need to do. In other areas, there's not. We're going to go over them, and I'll tell you which ones are which ones you need to be very strict with. Like for instance, the containers, the HIPAA approved containers. That's not something you can just not do. What is that? What's the bad part about, if I don't do this stuff, what can happen to me? You can be fined up to $50,000, and you can be put into jail for up to 1 year. So has that happened? It's not very often. It's very rare, and it's usually like a hospital that's misusing their environment. It's very rare to get reported for like a small doctor's firm or something like that. That's super rare. It's more in the hospitals. But if you do get reported by your employee or by somebody who feels like you're not being HIPAA compliant, again, you can serve up to $50,000 in fines and up to a year in prison. And I looked it up. It does happen. So it's not an impossible scenario. So we have to stay compliant, and to stay compliant, we're going to use this platform. To use the platform, we're going to open the controls, and we're going to upload evidence or compliant in here, task uploads. And we're going to make this available to auditors and executives and board of directors and role holders and groups that need access to it. It's going to tell us all the different types of artifacts that we uploaded. Like, we're going to talk about those artifacts here in a minute. So we're going to use this Lionfish platform here to maintain compliance. to give auditors a firsthand view of, or members of our organization a firsthand view of how we remain compliant. And there is HIPAA compliance. You need to get it certified. Basically, there is a HIPAA group that goes around and maintains, tells you if you're compliant or not. All right, let's jump into these controls. 4.1, security management process. Sounds very bizarre. It's your security plan. It's your policy, your policies and procedures for your security. So you're gonna have something called a security policy. It's gonna be like 10 pages long. It's gonna include like your password, how often you change your password, what that your identity engine, what it is, what roles and groups you have, who's in charge, of what, how you maintain, what do you do for backups, all of your security processes, how you hire people, what background checks you do, that kind of thing. So that's what that is. You're going to have a document. You can, again, upload it here. Security policies are, I think we might have one here at Lionfish to share with you. It could be generic in the beginning. They make ones that are more HIPAA that speak about the different HIPAA engines and pieces of it. So, but for the most part, it's just a conglomeration of documents that talk about how you're staying compliant. 4.2, assign security responsibilities. So you need to have an identity engine. This is something that's like a core to most businesses. I was just looking at a list of like 11 of them the other day, but they start out with, Active Directory, IAM from Amazon Web Services, Azure Active Directory for Azure, and then they have other ones that are out there like LDAP and some other different kinds of ones. But your identity engine identifies all the members of your organization, of your company, who they are, what their usernames are, what their passwords are, what their roles are, what the groups they belong to, and then it also should be able to tell what what access they have to things, what folders they can get into, which folders they can't. So you're going to create an identity model, and that identity model is going to have users, administrators, people with certain different powers, and those people are going to be all belonging to different groups. You're not just going to have a lone administrator out there who just stands alone. You're going to have an administrator, you're going to have an administrator group, and you're going to have responsibilities and roles of that administrator. So a big thing about HIPAA is that you need to maintain physical security, because if you have a workstation with a bunch of medical records on it and someone just walks up and sits down and opens it up, that's a HIPAA violation. And so you need to make sure that all of your team members are trained or understand that there's HIPAA data in the environment, which is 4.3. Workforce security. You want to make sure that all of the members of your team know that there's HIPAA in your infrastructure, where it's located, how to access it, who can access it, what roles and responsibilities there are. So this all ties into not only your assigned your identity, but it also is talking about how everyone needs to be made aware of the fact that you have medical records and that they need to be secured, that they can't be laying out on a table in a room. You can't just leave a folder on a table with a bunch of medical records in it. So everyone needs to be made aware of the fact that you are in a HIPAA environment, and that's 4.3. 4.4, information access management. So different people will need different roles and responsibilities in groups, and those different roles, responsibility, and groups all need to have different levels of access to different types of data. You're not going to give maybe you will give the receptionist or the office manager access to HIPAA data, but you might not give it to an intern or some other person or the accounting team. The accounting team doesn't need access to HIPAA data, so you wouldn't give it to them. So you need to segregate it by having roles and responsibilities. And the only real way to have roles and responsibilities is to have an identity engine. Security awareness and training. There's a lot of services out there that have HIPAA training. It's mandatory, so you need to, usually sign up with a reputable source. I don't suggest, like I do for other trainings, that you make it yourself because there's different there's a lot of different components that you have to cover in it. It's a lot of it's an intense amount of training. So I would not make it on my own. I would not do a PowerPoint presentation. I would enlist the aid of a HIPAA training company or a HIPAA training resource. So again, you can do security awareness training of some sort within your organization just to tell everybody that there's secure data and all that kind of stuff. But you definitely need to go to a HIPAA training company. And it's not expensive. It's just like the HR training companies out there, which I would try to leverage all of them at the same time. So just basic security awareness, sexual harassment, and then HIPAA training all in one, package deal. Try to get that from one company, but you definitely need to do it. So at a certain number of people, you need to do it for sexual harassment. But for HIPAA training, it's no matter if you touch that data, you need to have the training. Security incident procedures. So HIPAA has we have an incident response plan, and in it there's a HIPAA based response workflow. So if you just ask Jeremy or you just ping him afterward, we have a template for security incidences. And again, it has HIPAA in there and how to report to, who to report to, what to do in the event that a HIPAA incident occurs. So you need to have a security incident response plan. And that plan, again, we have it, we can give it to you, or you can make it yourself, or you can use a template based on, what your company requires. But we have one that you don't have to worry about the fact that you don't have one. And again, it has how you deal with security incident response, issues, how often you check for that, you run test security incident and how you respond, and then lessons learned. There's like 14 sections of that document, so you can go through it one by one and and then keep it as your security incident policy and process. We actually have a security incident a risk approach, which this is all about risk approach, risk assessments, and risk, these are also going to feed into your security incident response process. Contingency plan. What is that? It is your DR plan. It's your disaster recovery plan or your business continuity plan. You can have a business continuity plan, which is a little bit more in depth than your disaster recovery plan. Your disaster recovery plan talks about like if there's a hurricane or you lose some servers or something, that's a DR plan. A business continuity plan may say, what if our CEO is replaced? What if we acquire another company? So your business continuity plan is going to be way richer, and we have templates for both the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan that you can use. Again, Jeremy will give it to you if you ask him for it. But again, yeah, it's just a DR plan. They're quite long. They talk about, they talk about roles, responsibilities, what kind of disasters you would expect to occur, what your response would be, and that everyone in the organization has agreed that that's the right place to go. Evaluation. So when you run an evaluation, it means you're just going through and you're checking all of the boxes of your checklist. Your checklist needs to have on it that you have all the things that you're supposed to have to be HIPAA compliant. So in a regular world, you're gonna do an evaluation once every quarter, every 6 months, or every year, and you're going to say, are we maintaining the levels of HIPAA compliance we need to be? You can look at a HIPAA compliant, like something that describes HIPAA compliance. There's 5 different areas of compliance. So you're going to be able to just have checklists within each of the 5 areas. So they're all right here. Are you physically secure? Do you have technical safeguards? You should have a checklist and then evaluate it on a regular basis. Make an evaluation into a document so that you can show an auditor or a HIPAA certified person that you're maintaining all of your different levels of HIPAA compliance. Business associate contracts and other arrangements. So you're going to want to keep a vendor. You want to have a couple things. First of all, you want to have a vendor questionnaire where you ask your vendors a bunch of questions. We have one, I think we can share with you, but most companies can come up with their own vendor questionnaire. Like, if you need to transmit HIPAA data to them, are they also HIPAA compliant? That's just like the basic question, but I'm just giving you an example of a question you would ask them. During transport, do you use encryption? Are you using secure? Do you have an identity engine? Do you have antivirus? Do you have, endpoint detection response? Do you have a firewall? That kind of thing. You can ask all these questions of your vendors, especially if you're going to be transporting data to them. Like, I, I had a customer who did lots and lots of X-rays, right? So they didn't keep the X-rays there. They gave them to a hospital. The hospital would ask for the records. They'd go, "Can we please have the X-rays?" And so there had to be a method, a secure HIPAA-approved method of transmitting the data from the X-ray company to the hospital. They both had bidirectional questionnaires. The hospital asked the X-ray company a lot of questions we had to answer, and similarly, we asked the hospital a lot of questions that they had to answer. So we kept track of what all that meant and what it all said, and we also kept track of contracts we had that ensured that we maintain HIPAA compliance within the contract. So if you have between the hospital and the X-ray company, they had a contract, and in their contract it stated that they had to maintain and meet the level of HIPAA compliance that was required in order to not be in violation of HIPAA. So you have to keep track of all those things. You have to keep all your contracts and your vendors and your vendor arrangements and your vendor agreements, all part of a record area where you're going to keep them all so that you can access them at any given time. If you're going to be audited by someone who does a HIPAA audit, they're going to ask for those contracts. And if you have a contract with somebody that doesn't state that you will maintain and observe the HIPAA compliance rules, then that's going to be a problem. So you need to make sure that any arrangements you have with companies where you may be transporting or receiving HIPAA data from, that you ensure that you mention it in the contract that there will be such an activity occurring. So your HIPAA data shouldn't be on computers that are accessible by anybody other than people who have the role of a person who can touch medical data. So if you have, like for instance, if you have your accountants and you have your doctors, they shouldn't have access to the same areas. Now, there's several different ways of getting around this. We had it so that when you're in the examination room, you would have to log into your computer and as a doctor, and then you could see the information, the medical information of that person, and then after a few minutes it would log you out of the computer. And so if an accountant came in there and tried to open it up, they wouldn't be able to see anything, and the timeouts were very strict on the for the screensaver that went to the login. But for the most part, you don't want to have access to the HIPAA data being out in the open able for anyone to see. If anyone does, like for instance, if you have a receptionist or office manager or nurses in the front station, they need to bring up stuff, right? They need to bring up the patient records. They need to understand what the person's there for, or what doctor they're seeing, or all that stuff. Those are usually self-contained in those computers. Those nurses can't leave their stations without locking their computers. And those nurses are the only ones that can, if you come up behind them and try to look at the screens, they should tell you not to do that, or they should have screens on their computers that they can only see. You can only see the data if you're sitting down and looking at it. And so similarly, you don't want people walking through your building, just opening medical room doors, going to computers, moving the mouse and seeing a bunch of people's medical data, which goes on down to workstation use. So again, same thing, access to those areas, and then workstation use is prohibited to be done on machines that, they're logged into. If you're going to do IT work, um, then you're going to want to make sure that the person logs out and that you have no ability to see that information. Workstation security, it needs to be two-factor authentication. It needs to have screen locking. It needs to possibly have screen blurring so that you can't look at it. It needs to potentially be in a room that is not accessible by normal individuals within the company, except doctors, nurses, and individuals that are needed to, like X-ray techs or whatever, technicians. So all of that needs to be in place. It needs to be secure. It needs to be in a lot of places it's locked behind a door, so that can only be accessible by a doctor. Device and media controls, two-factor authentication, encryption, the ability to not plug in a thumb drive to the computer and suck all the data off of the thumb drive. I've actually seen medical records moved around in infrastructure on a thumb drive, and I've seen that thumb drive around a doctor's neck or in his hand, and that's how they maintain control. The doctor has to take the thumb drive out and put it, keep it on his person at all times, or that kind of thing. There's also at some hospitals where some doctor's key card or their fob or their YubiKey is how they would, when they plug it into the computer, it allows access to the HIPAA data or to the person's medical data. So I've seen those the reverse of like having a computer locked down. I've seen that the person is required in order to move forward with like viewing the data and stuff like that. Okay, access control. What you want to do is you want to make sure that, folders that have HIPAA data or personal, type of medical data in them are kept in a group, are protected by a group, are protected by, the digital wall, the firewall, and that people have, only certain people can access the right things. So you want to make sure that you have groups, individuals belong to those groups that can access certain data, and that you want to maintain that by in a couple methods. First of all, when you hire somebody, you want to move them into a group by having their manager request access for them. So you wouldn't just have a bunch of access controls, but then I could just join a group and have access to that data without anybody saying anything. I could just ask for it. Hey, can I go into the medical records group? Sure, yeah, go ahead. No, you have to have it so that it's protected by a manager or protected by a process, or three people have to sign off, or the CEO or whatever has to sign off, or a doctor has to sign off. So you need to have it so that not only do you have the groups and roles and responsibilities, but you also make sure that those groups, roles, and responsibilities are only accessible by the right people from the right people. So that's what you need to do there. And then similarly, someone in your group that's knowledgeable about who should belong in what groups, and be able to go and look at the access control list, see, we print out every quarter. I'll print out a list of folders and who belongs to what in what groups and who has access to what folders. And in some scenarios, I've seen it where a person has been added to a group to a folder by themselves, which is a boo-boo. I would say, no, this is not right. You need to add these individuals to the group, and then that group will have, and then we'll remove them from that group when they get when they move on from that position, or they're terminated, or they quit their jobs. You need to also be able to go in and say, okay, this person is no longer with us. Let's remove them from that group. But you should print out a list of all the folders and infrastructure components and look at them from a group and perspective and from a ROS perspective of, is anyone been added to this data area that doesn't belong, or on an individual basis. You don't want to have a folder with Tammy, Linda, Fred, Barry, all individually accessing it. You want to make a group called, finance, and then add them, those 4 people in there. Similarly, allow it so that people are, get the forms that they filled out to get access, and keep them in an area, and also get the forms that they had to fill out to get taken off. Integrity. This is basically, it's a difficult to describe technical safeguard as integrity, but you want to maintain integrity of your environment by not breaking the rules, not allowing for one-offs, not allowing for things to be done incorrectly. Exceptions are the rule. So you want to maintain your information technical area integrity by, having an IT person in charge of that group, having oversight, doing your own internal audits, making sure that you have disaster recovery plans, doing all these different things that will, make sure that you're HIPAA compliant. Person or entity authentication. So in multi-factor authentication, 2-factor authentication, you can use physical, like eyeball sensors or thumbprint sensors to access areas. And an entity is external group or other company. If they're going to be accessing your different information systems or data, you want to make sure that you give them the appropriate rights and responsibilities. Along with the people, you want to make sure everyone has the right roles, responsibilities, and that they're the right groups that need to be accessing your environment, and that if they need to be accessing the medical information or the data, that they have the right authentication set up for them. Transmission security. There's the way that you move data can be physical, or it can be digital. So in the digital information world, you transmit data using encryption, and the different types of encryption there are like TLS or SSL, or all these. You can use different types of encryption with encryption keys. Hash. You can make sure the hash is properly set, which is, the hash is like an identifier for the file. So when you create a file, it has a hash number like 55, and if you change the file, it'll change it to like 57, and so that you'll know that, hey, this file is not the same file. It's supposed to be 55. You can keep track of these things, like what all the hashes are on the files, and then if you look at the file, it's different. Someone's modified it so that you can take appropriate action. But for the most part, you want to use encryption when you move data. And you also want to use encryption when data is at rest, or when data is just sitting there, like doing nothing, like in a file folder, or on a backup, or that kind of thing. You want to make sure all that data is encrypted, and you want to identify if it has HIPAA data on it as well. All right, that's it for today. Any questions about HIPAA? What HIPAA is, if there's any HIPAA data that you want to know. if you want to know if something is HIPAA compliant. Again, Jeremy can be asked for the incident response report, the business continuity plan, the business disaster recovery plan. Yeah, I think all that. We can give you those templates. And I think he also has risk analysis and risk management. You want to run a risk analysis. You want to have a risk approach when you do your incident response plan, because you want to make sure that when you have an incident that it aligns with what risks that you're potentially going to have in your organization. So if you have a risk of someone coming in and stealing a computer, you want to make sure that that's in your maybe one of your incidents in your incident response plan, how you deal with a missing or stolen computer, that kind of thing. Again, this one's a little bit more serious than all the other ones because you can go to jail, or you can get fined if you break it. And if someone reports you, they're protected by what's called the whistleblower law, which means that they can internal people in your own organization, if you're a medical office, can report you, and they are protected by what's called the whistleblower law, so that they're I think in some scenarios their identity doesn't even need to be disclosed as to who, but there's no retaliation that you can take against them, etc. So again, all right. Anybody else has any other questions? Again, use Lionfish's platform to keep track of all these things, and next week we'll knock out the rest of HIPAA. It's not much left, so I'll just go into the rest of HIPAA next week, and then we'll start another the one after this as well next week. So we'll have like two different control sets next week. All right, that's it. Then no one has any questions. Have a good day.